Welcome to the Passionate Leader Institute's Executive Insights series. My name is Jennifer Smith, CEO of Growth Potential Consulting and founder of the Passionate Leader Institute. We are trusted strategists helping growth minded organizations curate and develop a steady stream of ready now executives that excel at leading high performing teams. Today, our topic is C Suite Insights Practical Strategies for Executive Success with Javier Evans, the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at a banking institution in the financial services industry. He has well over 35 years of experience in brokerage and consumer and commercial banking, investment banking, operations, and human resources management. Additionally, Javier is committed to philanthropic endeavors and is actively involved in several organizations. So, welcome, Javier. I am excited to have you here as a guest and and looking forward to our conversation today.
Jennifer, thank you so much for that warm introduction. And this conversation is so well overdue, as you know. I have been looking forward to us sitting down and sharing, some of my journey and some of my insights, as to how I got to where I am today. So thank you and look forward to having a great conversation with you this morning.
Wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and get started because I am sure our
Sure.
listeners are just waiting to hear what you have to share today. So let's start with a little bit of your career journey. Tell us about that.
Sure. So I started my journey right out of college. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I started in banking in a rotational bank program at a local savings bank here in New York. It was a great experience. It allowed me to really learn, banking from the ground up. I started in an operational capacity which was, now 30 some odd years later, was a fantastic opportunity because it really let me learn banking from the ground up. So,
Mm,
having started there, I kind of worked my way through various operational roles. I was supposed to rotate into different areas. I never did, but it worked out well. At some
mm,
point in my career, I knew I wanted to pivot towards the HR field. And,
mhm,
I raised my hand and I kept saying, hey, I'd like to go to HR. And after much back and forth, um, uh, the bank finally, said, okay, fine. Instead of having you become a consumer bank executive, we'll have you go to human resources. And Jennifer, I
mm,
have to tell you, it's one of those things that where it was like an awakening. I knew I found my calling and my passion. Once I got to HR, it was phenomenal. So I spent, as you said, a lot of years in banking, brokerage, being able to see, life down on Wall Street in a very fast paced, hectic environment. I was, operated in big global banks, big regional banks. And today, I have the luxury of leading one of the best HR teams that I've had the pleasure of working with over, a career that spans, 35 or so years.
mm.
Yeah.
How wonderful is that story? And some similarities there too, as we've talked about in the past, me
Yeah.
being in the finance side and then having this epiphany that I wanted to move into human resources when I was inside of corporate America. So it's like a defining moment almost for you. So I'm curious, tell us a little bit more about either that defining moment or another in your career and how you were able to really either plow through or overcome that.
Sure. It's interesting, like you said. When I was an undergrad, I went to St. John's University here in New York. I took a lot of psych courses, and I was very interested always in just, what made people tick. But I also had this natural curiosity around business, how business operates. And as I
Mm,
said, for me, I would as I was in the operational role to begin with, it gave me that foundation to really ask a lot of questions about, the business world. However, I was always fascinated with the human psychology part of it. What made people tick? How do we pick the right people? I felt like, at that point in my career, I felt like I had an opportunity to make a difference. I was working for a smaller local bank.
Mhm.
We were growing rapidly. We were doing a ton of acquisitions,
Mhm.
and so the bank was really moving. And I felt like I could go into the HR field and really have an impact. Really turn how we were selecting people. Are we how are we positioning the bank today? We call it an employee value proposition. Back then it
Mhm.
was, well, why do you want to work here? And why do people want to, why do people stay here? It was a great opportunity for me to have an impact. And it's interesting, right, Jennifer? I think I shared with you, my friends at the time were like, why would you want to go to, back then it was personnel. Why would you do that? You're going to, you're going to just derail your career. And I said, no, I don't think I am. I think that I have an opportunity to really, change how we were doing things, change the quality of folks that we were hiring, and it turned out to be the best thing that I ever did. So, it's one of those moments where, you raise your hand and you take a chance on yourself, because I had a
Mhm.
clear career path. Again, as I said to you earlier, Jennifer, the bank wanted me to become a consumer bank regional manager, running a series of branches, which would have been fine. But for me, I knew I was, I had that inner gut feeling that said,
Mhm.
"Hey, human resources is where you really want to go."
And you were confident enough and courageous enough to actually take a chance on you,
I
which is
I
amazing.
was. I'll share a quick story.
Mhm.
The president of the bank at the time, he called me into his office because I actually had resigned,
Mhm.
which I don't advocate that people do. But I felt like I had done everything that the bank had asked me to do at that point in time. And when I
Mhm.
raised my hand and said, "Hey, I'd like to go to human resources," I felt like they weren't listening to me and they weren't
Mhm.
taking, my feelings into account. So I was confident enough in my abilities that I said, fine, then, maybe it's time for me to move on. And, I was fortunate enough that the president of the bank called me into his office and he was like, "What is this I hear, young man, that you're resigning? That's ridiculous." And he sat me down and he asked me about, what do you want to do and where do you want to do with your career? And I shared with him and I gave him all the reasons that I told you, and he said, "Okay, fine." It was a Thursday afternoon, and he told me, he said, "Take Friday off. Monday, you report to human resources." So he took a
Mhm.
chance on me based on my confidence and my abilities to articulate why I wanted to go into human resources.
Mhm. Well, and Javier, I'm very certain that you had great work performance as well, right? Because if you have great performance and people know you, they know what you're contributing to the organization, then there's a higher probability they're going to call you in and actually have the conversation, right?
Absolutely. I mean, look, it all starts with you've got to perform and execute. I learned
Hmm.
very early on. I had some great mentors. One of my very first managers, we are best friends today. We talk, quite regularly even today. And he told me, he said, look, you always have to be prepared to make decisions. That's what we get paid to do. We get paid to get work done, we get paid to manage risk, and we get paid to execute against the goals that we establish. So I would say that yes, performance, tops everything. You've got to be able to show and demonstrate to the organization that you're with that you are a top performer, that you're willing to roll up your sleeves and get and go out there and get things done. There was, I remember, I mean, at I was 21 at the time,
Mhm.
and I just come out of college, and I was like, okay, whatever you all want me to do, I'm willing to do it. And again, had some great mentors who really took me under their wing and started teaching me and showing me how to get things done and how to respond to customer inquiries, how to resolve issues. So I was very fortunate at a very early age to have some great influences on my career.
Mhm. That sounds wonderful. And it's a great segue to another
Sure.
question about mentors. Tell us a little bit about your perspective on mentors or versus sponsors and sponsorship. We hear both of those terms today and how they're important. So what's your perspective on that?
Sure. I think that having a mentor is critical to your overall success. I can look back as I shared with you, at 21, I was very fortunate. Here I am, just graduated, out of college, wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I had this great mentor. She took me under her wing and she said, "Look, I see greatness in you." And I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm just here to do a job." And Jennifer, she said to me, "I'm willing to teach you because I think you have something that will get you, to propel you forward." So again, she sat me down and she taught me how to, as I said, how to resolve issues. Here's how you do. If we were going to meetings, she would
Mhm.
prep me. Here's what you do when you go into the room. Make sure you scan the room. Make sure you understand who the key players are, who the key decision makers are. At that time, it was a much more formal structure than I think we are today, Jennifer. So you spoke when you were spoken to, and you
Mhm.
answered the questions as succinctly as you can. But if it wasn't for Vivian, and her name is Vivian Kallega, and she was one of the best teachers that I have. So having had that foundation, I
Mhm.
have always prided myself in either a identifying great mentors and or in the
Mhm.
organizations that I've worked with today in the company that we're with today. We have a great mentor program that we built from scratch, and it was based on my experiences. Today we've got I think 80 people who have gone through the program. It is a fantastic. People have developed great relationships, Jennifer, across the organization, across business
Mhm.
channels. And I have colleagues coming up to me and say, Javier, thank you for establishing this program and giving us the opportunity to be able to have a mentor and having this program. And as you said, Jennifer, when you sort of look at mentors, is someone that you trust, someone that you can
Mhm.
go to, someone that you feel comfortable with and say, hey, tell me the truth. Here's my issue. Here's what I'm dealing with. So, find somebody who's not just going to give you lip service and agree with you, but someone who's going to really sit down and show you the flaws, but also celebrate the wins with you. Those mentors are a little bit different than sponsors. Sponsors are the people who are in the room who are saying, hey, yeah, we have this issue, we have this project, we have this opportunity. The sponsor is the person who's saying, you know what? Jennifer is the right person for that role. But again, it's based on your performance, it's based on you executing. And it's almost, I'll kind of say it almost leads into, what's your brand, and you have to build that brand over time.
Yes. And it changes over time because when you're earlier in your
Yes.
career, you're going to have a brand of being more tactical, more of an executor, getting it done. as you elevate in the organization, your brand becomes a person who can then lead others, who can create the vision, who can help inspire them so that they're now taking the action and being tactical and that continues as you elevate. And so it's great that you're talking about brand because many people don't stop and think about their brand and how it's changing over time and what they want it to be versus maybe even what it is today.
I agree, and I spend a lot of time mentoring folk, especially we look at the new hires coming into the organization or the folks who are early in their career, and I try
Mhm,
to explain to them, your brand is important, right? Because it's what people say when you're about you when you're not in the room, and it does sound cliche, but it's so
mhm,
important that people don't take the time to sort of do the homework. As I said, I learned early on, if I'm going to the meeting, what are the right protocols? Who are the decision makers in the room? Sometimes those decision makers, right, Jennifer, we've now learned are not who you think they are. And
mhm,
again, it's what people think of you, when you're not there. Are you known for, hey, Javier is willing to walk in here and listen, to hear the issues and make a
mhm,
sound judgment? You're not always going to get it right. Don't be
mhm,
afraid to make a mistake. Hopefully, you don't make too many mistakes. But if you make a mistake, you got to own it, right?
mhm,
You've got to say, yeah, you know what? I made a mistake. Here's what I learned from it. Here's what, how I recover. Because to me, the recovery is what's important. That says a lot about you as the individual as well. And the last thing I will say about brand, and I try to impart this, again to our junior colleagues who are joining us, it's about relationships. It's about
yes.
building trust, and building trust takes time. It's those early interactions. It's me reaching out to you, Jennifer, and saying, "Hey, Jennifer, I need your help," or "Hey, Jennifer, how can I help you?" Right? If I execute and deliver, you're going to say, "Hey, you know what? Javier was there when I needed him and he helped me." And somewhere down the road, we never know where our paths will cross again. Where, you know what, you may say, I remember, he helped me. Here's an opportunity for me to return the favor, or certainly to help. So I think, for us in our business, relationships are key, and they also say a lot about you as an individual.
Hmm. Yeah, and especially for individuals who may have a more technical bend to their work. I think about last week, I was with a group of 11 emerging leaders, and their natural inclination is to focus on their technical aspect and their skill because it's very, people might say it's not unique, but it's unique enough that if you focus on it, it helps you accelerate. Like there's this career path that's pretty much mapped out. Fascinating thing about that is on the people side and building the relationships, that doesn't come as naturally to them. And so we were
Correct.
talking about exactly what you were saying. Yes, perform and get your work done. And you have to focus on building relationships and start early versus waiting till later in your career and you're like, oh, I want to move up, but you haven't built any relationships in your organization. So it's
I
so great
agree.
to hear you say that, Javier.
And
Yeah,
it is so critical. And again, you have to do it in a way that's genuine, because what
exactly.
I often see too, people try to sort of go sell themselves. Oh, because hey, here's our CEO, and I'm going to go sell myself to the CEO. No, what you
Hmm.
want to do is say, hey, introduce yourself, have that sort of elevator pitch ready, but you also have to be authentic, and you
Hmm.
also have to do it in a way that comes across as genuine. You just can't walk up to people and say, oh, I've had people walk up to me and they just met me and say, I want you to be my mentor. And I'm like, okay, I don't know who you are. You've never come out, come and meet me. And I'm out and about a lot. That's the one good thing I will say, Jennifer. The company that I'm with today, the
Hmm.
executives are always out and about and are very visible across the organization. And
Hmm.
oftentimes, people take that two ways. Either A, they use it to try and artificially sell themselves, and it comes across very disingenuous,
Hmm.
or they'll say to me, "Hey, look, I'd love to spend 5-10 minutes with you to get your insights." Those are the individuals that I want to follow up with, and I often say to people, "Look, call my admin, get on my calendar, and let's sit down and talk." And I'm often surprised at how many people don't take me up on my offer, which says a lot as well.
Hmm. It says
Yes,
that they're not ready. It says that they're not willing to take the steps necessary to actually
correct.
build a relationship. It doesn't mean that they won't be ready in the future. It's just at this
No,
point in time, they're not ready. Yeah.
absolutely. And it's a shame because it could be a missed opportunity. Because oftentimes if I invite you to say, "Hey, get on my calendar," there is something that either the conversation we had or something that you may have said that sparked an interest in me having, a further conversation with you about, what you may have said. Or I may know that, 3 months from now we may be looking for somebody with a particular set of experiences and skill sets, and that this person may be that person that we're looking for.
Yes,
Yeah.
they never know. They never know.
No,
The other thing that you said, Javier, that was really important, and I believe this wholeheartedly, is at the end of those conversations, asking how they can be of service to that person, what they can do, how they can support them, and even following up on that. So tell me a little bit more about that piece of it, because as I mentioned, I know that that's really where the building the relationship comes from, because I believe you go first. You actually help and support that person, even if they haven't done anything for you. It's not about that, it's about you being of service.
absolutely. And I look back again on my career, and Jennifer, I think my mom had a huge influence on me. And I
Mm,
know, you and I have talked a little bit. My mom was one who was always of service. She would
mhm,
readily give of her time, her money. She was always willing to put back out into the community. So I learned early on that, look, helping others, it really is the not only the right thing to do, is it's our obligation to help those who are the. So I've always approached work where I'd walk into a room and I'm like, "Hey, how can I help you?" It is the
mm,
opening salve. It opens up a dialogue. How can I be of service to you? What can I do to help you? Whether it's career wise, whether it's personal, people will often say to me, "Well, you always seem like you're in a good mood." And I say, "Well, you know what? I'm not always in a good mood, but I know that in the role that I hold, in this job, I've got to make you feel as welcome, as inviting, right off the bat. Otherwise, Jennifer, you will never open up to me and and
mhm,
and be willing to have an open, honest, conversation." But there are days where, I'm not in a good mood, but I've learned to internalize that because I prioritize making sure that the people who are in front of me feel like they are the most important person, at that time. So, learning early on that giving, opens doors, and it pays itself back in spades, over time. So, I learned that very early on, as I said, from, watching my mom, being very, very active in our local community as well.
mhm.
Hmm.
Yes. In what you said, you were talking about the being of service so others would be open and willing to talk to you.
Yes.
And when I was talking to some of your colleagues, they speak very highly of you, and especially in this way that they're like, yes, we can talk to him. We're comfortable talking to him. We feel like he listens to us. I'm curious, what are some other skills or techniques that you believe executives need to have today to create a more welcoming environment with their staff, given all that's going on and how,
Yes.
staff are feeling at this point in time in our world?
Sure. Look, as an executive, we've got a ton of things going on. But,
Mhm,
again, I think one of the things that I try to do is, if I'm meeting with someone, I try to be in the moment. I learned
mhm,
that the hard way. I've gotten harsh feedback, Jennifer, early on as a manager, as a leader, that, people would sit in front of me and I would be doing two, three things while they're talking to me. And I've
mhm,
learned that, people have said to me, well, you're not interested in what I have to say. And I'm like, no, I am. But
mhm,
I also know that I need to get things done. Um, After hearing that several times, both at home and in the office, I then learned, okay, it's not okay to be doing two or three different things. You need to
mhm,
set the time so that you can actively participate in the conversation with the person that's in front of you. So, as an executive, yes, time is precious. I try to listen. I ask, good follow-up questions. I try to, get use open-ended questions so that the person will kind of, open up and give me a little bit more. Now, there are times where I have to move the conversation along a little bit faster, but certainly I think that as an executive, you've got to just take a step back, assess what's going on. Why is this person here? Try and
mhm,
do some homework. If I'm going to go visit, last week I was traveling. I went
mhm,
out to visit one of my business unit. I did my homework. Where are we going? Why are we going there? Who's in the audience? What are we hoping? I went out and I met with that business leader, and she shared with me. She said, hey, we're bringing together our top salespeople. We're going to go out and see some
mhm,
clients. We think that your background and your experience, having done a sales role and going out and meeting clients, we think bringing you along as head of HR will help us, to connect, because they were meeting with some folks who had a very similar background, to
mhm,
myself. So, you've
mhm.
got to do your homework, you got to be prepared, and you have to listen to what people have to say.
Mhm. And it sounds like because as an executive, you're out there, people know you, they've heard about your background. They were also like, yes, Javier is the person we want to come with us because
Correct.
we feel that he can help. So you've allowed yourself to be known and be present so that people are now even seeking you out for these opportunities to help, it sounds like your organization at large, which
Yes.
is great.
Which is quaint. And it's interesting because, Jennifer, it's funny. I often hear, you're not like the typical human resources officer. And I go, well, what's that? And Jennifer, I scratch my head because I don't know what that means. And I really struggled with it because for me, it always has been about, how does your business operate? That's the framework with which I, have my conversations. I meet with all of my peers on the executive team. We have great one-on-ones, and I want to understand whether it's a functional area like the head of credit. Oftentimes I can help step in, and the head of credit here, he is phenomenal, a great leader. He is,
Mhm,
he's very thoughtful. I admire him greatly, and there are days where I will walk in and I'll go, hey, I heard there's a little bit of, back and forth. So, I can help, sort of mediate issues when, before they completely derail. And I think that's what, my peers really tell me. You approach, this whole job very differently. You're looking at it not from just an HR lens, but you're looking at it from the same lens that we are. We are a business, and HR is a business as well. And I tell a lot of people who are interested in HR, they'll say to me, "Oh, I love working with people," and I'm like, "Yep, that's important." But we are a business. We have you have to think about this as running your own shop. And how do you get stuff done? How do you get credibility? My leaders trust me because I get up in the morning and I'm reading, the Wall Street Journal. I'm in the New York Times. I've got CNBC going or MSNBC, and I'm taking it all in because I don't know during the course of the day if we're going to talk about, interest rates and whether they're falling and what does that mean for us as an institution, or some geopolitical, issue that's happening halfway around the world that has an impact on what happens to us day to day here. So,
Hmm.
for me, I really try to learn the businesses that I'm supporting. I try to understand, and I love the industry that we're in. It's challenging, it's tough, it's difficult, but I really just am passionate about the work that we do as a bank, and how. And again, I don't want it to sound a little bit corny, but we really have an obligation to uplift the communities that we're in. And we also, we create great opportunities for people to have some very, very long lasting and self fulfilling, self rewarding careers.
Hmm.
Yep.
It's interesting, Javier. There was a lot in what you just said, and I was laughing on the inside and smiling on the outside because how you described what you do as an executive for HR is different than the traditional HR executive. My hope is that more of them are starting to transition into the direction that you're in, but they were focused on the people or the personnel aspects of it, not necessarily understanding the business. And when they did understand the business, they still looked at it from a human resources lens and not a business lens. And so what you're
Correct.
describing is a true trusted partner for your colleagues versus you trying to beat them over the head with human resource practices. You're like, how do we integrate them into the business, which is very critical for success. So for those of you that are listening in the human resources field, I hope you were taking some notes there because Javier was sharing some critical success factors and how to actually position yourself differently. In fact, last week with this group of individuals, some of them said, "Can I trust HR?" And I was like, wow, that right there says a lot about the opportunity that still exists for other organizations who have not positioned themselves well. Yeah.
No, I
Wonderful.
agree with you, Jennifer. And that question of trust, wow, there's a lot there. We could do a whole segment on trust. And
Hmm.
trust, it takes years to build trust, and it can unravel in the snap of a finger, right? Look, I often tell people, they'll come and say, well, I need to talk to you, but I got to trust that you're not going to do something. And I said, well, I'm always upfront. Depending
Hmm.
on what you tell me, I may
Hmm.
not have a choice. I may have to act because I'm obligated to act, because of the role that I'm in. But if it's not something that, that I'm obligated to act on, yeah, I'm willing to sit down and listen and hear what you have to say, but know that if it's something that's critical, I may have to act anyway, to resolve. But it is one of those fine lines. I think to get there, certainly as you said, for our fellow HR practitioners, I'm a big fan of finding people who work for me who have worked in other areas of the bank as well. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I don't hire career HR practitioners because I do, but I'm also
Mhm.
a big fan of having my HR people go out and do other roles and then come back to HR later on. Because I think that that has been one of those sort of quiet, subtle things that I look back at my career and I was able to say, "Hey, I am glad that I did go do a 2 year stint in lending. I knew I wanted to be in HR, but I also needed the credibility of being able to say, "Hey, I ran a lending team. I know what it's like to go knock on doors. I know what it's like to try and put together a deal and structure, a thing." So it gives me now today credibility with my commercial banking team. So don't be afraid to go off and do and gain some experiences that will, help you, further down the line in your career.
Mhm. Yes, yes. Gain that experience, the confidence to do it,
Yeah,
and the courage to step outside of your comfort zone so that you could expand your knowledge. So that's just some wonderful techniques. That leads
yeah,
me to a question as we begin to wrap up here. When you think about individuals who to the executive level today, you started to share some of the skills or the qualities that are needed.
yeah.
What additional skills and qualities would you share with our listeners as to things that they should really focus on so that they're ready to elevate to the C-suite?
So again, as as you sort of take those career, as you sort of look at your career, don't be afraid, and I say it again, to take those horizontal moves that
Mhm.
expose you to other parts of the business, especially those key critical areas that generate revenue for the institution in which you work in. The more you understand the business, the better you are as an executive, as well. I think as I look at our executive team, there is a natural curiosity that exists amongst us.
Mhm.
We're always asking each other about a process, how things operate, what do we need to do to get better. One of the things that I absolutely love about working here is our CEO is not afraid to ask. He's like, "Yeah, I hear from all of you all the things that we do well. What don't we do well and how do we get better at it?" So,
Mhm.
so I think, as people prepare to ascend into the C-suite, you must be prepared. You've got to do the homework. There are long days. The issues fly at you. You don't
Mhm.
always have the luxury of time, but you have
Mhm.
to be able to synthesize the data that you've been giving, and you have to be able to come to some sort of agreement or come to a decision as well. The last thing I will say that has served me well, I understand myself. I I know that I have a tendency, Jennifer, to sort of drift off to the next shiny thing,
Mhm.
right? And so I know that I need people around me who if I give them a project, I know that they're going to be executing against that project. They're going to come back to me and say, "Hey, here's where we are. Here's what we need. Here are the resources that we need to get this, to get this done." So I think, as an executive, what has helped me is to play to my weaknesses by surrounding myself with really strong, competent people who are very good at executing and getting things done as well. I can generate big picture ideas with the best of them, but it's having that sense of self to say, hey, yes, I want you to go do this. Here's what it looks like. Here's the outcome. But you also, I know that I need people who can go off and get things done and keep me honest.
hmm and that right there, what you said is so critical. Knowing yourself well, surrounding yourself by individuals who have strengths in areas that aren't necessarily a strength of yours, so that the entire team can be successful. And
Correct.
sometimes I hear executives and they want to diminish the things that they don't do well and not admit them so that they can surround themselves by a team that creates a whole. So it's great that you shared that, and I'm hoping that people are listening to that. I have really appreciated our conversation. And by the way, we could continue to talk probably for hours.
Absolutely.
But I know
Jennifer,
that
I enjoy this.
you're an extremely busy person, and I want to be very respectful of your time.
Sure.
And who knows, maybe we'll invite you back for a part two. That's what we'll do.
Maybe I would love to come back and do a part two, because the other side of what I get to do here,
Mhm,
and we'll talk some more about it maybe in part two, is the
mhm,
community involvement pieces. I mean, I absolutely love the fact that the institution I'm with, has us very much involved. I sit on three not for profit boards that keep me very, very busy in addition to my daytime job.
mhm.
And people say to me, well, how do you do it? And I said, look, if you love what you do, you find a way to make it work. So, that'll be part two. We can talk about, the philanthropic side of, what I think as executives, we have an obligation to give back, to the communities in which we operate and we serve. So
Well, we are certainly aligned there, and I am looking forward to that. And I will ensure that we get that scheduled. Um,
absolutely.
Truly has been an honor to speak with you today. And for you, those that are listening, I hope that you were taking notes. Javier was sharing critical success factors. He was sharing his strategies for success. He was sharing tips for how to be successful. And so my hope is that as you were taking notes, you were also thinking about what is the one thing that you can take action on when you get done listening to us talking here today. But with that, Javier, I thank you so much again for sharing your experiences with us today. Your insights are valuable and invaluable to the leaders that are listening to this conversation. And I look forward to part two.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's been a pleasure.
And for those of you who joined us today, thank you again. I look forward to having you join us in our next conversation. Again, my name is Jennifer Smith, and I wish you a peaceful and productive rest of the day. Take care and be well.